Dave's got me wired for sound here, so I hope everything, you hear me. I've never been accused of being not able to be heard, but this morning I am going to be covering over a lesson that I feel is very pertinent and needful for today. For we do live in a trying time. There's many things that are happening in this life we can't understand. But we have to realize that God has set standards for us and set patterns for us to follow. This morning I heard a lesson from 2 Timothy chapter 4 that was expressed the clearest I've heard in years. I've heard a lot of speakers and who have addressed various subjects, but it was very well addressed, and we have to remember that it was a command. It's not something that we have an option to follow. It is something we must follow. And the lesson I have this morning is the same nature. It's a lesson that we must apply. I want to thank Silas for his reading this morning of the Scripture. Very well presented. And this is a time that we have to heed to what he's saying. Because we have a lot of trials, and sometimes we think we have to take retribution in our own hands. We have to realize that if we turn it to the Lord, we can move on, and we can have a better and fuller life. In a couple minutes, I'm going to ask Brother Rod if he will read Romans 13, 1 through 7. So if you will, please open your Bibles to Romans 13, 1 through 7. I'm going to ask you to hold on to that and to follow along in the lesson as I go through, because I'm going to be taking from this reading and put it into application for us to consider today. And once again, you're going to see that it is addressed to us, even though it was addressed to Paul. Paul was writing it and to the Romans, but it has a meaning that we need to consider and follow in the trying years ahead. I'm going to ask Rod, if he will, please come up and read our reading this morning, Romans 13, 1 through 7.
Thank you, Brother Tom. Good morning. Romans 13, verses 1 through 7. Let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authorities resists what God has appointed, and those who resist will incur judgment. For rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. Would you have no fear of the one who is in authority? Then do what is good, and you will receive his approval. For he is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain. For he is the servant of God, an avenger who carries out God's wrath on the wrongdoer. Therefore, one must be in subjection, not only to avoid God's wrath, but also for the sake of conscience. For because of this, you also pay taxes. For the authorities are ministers of God, attending to this very thing. Pay to all what is owed to them, taxes to whom taxes are owed, revenue to whom revenue is owed, respect to whom respect is owed, honor to whom honor is owed.
Amen. Thank you. The purpose of this lesson is to help us fully understand or reinforce our responsibilities or attitudes towards government authorities. I can't speak for all of you, but I find myself often at odds with civil authority. And as I listen to the news and the things that are happening here in the last 2 weeks or so, I even get more concerned. In the scriptures this morning, reading that we just had, the writer addresses how Christians were to respond to these authorities. As you will see, the question is subject that is not only pertinent in the time of Paul's writing, but also is very pertinent for today. Because as we see things that are happening around us and that there, we want to take, as I mentioned earlier, we want to take revenge. We want to do something. We want to say something. But we're going to see here in the lesson that we have instructions of how to handle the situation that is going to be beneficial to us because of the results of how we apply it. In order to address this question, I will be addressing 4 areas for your consideration. First, I'm going to be addressing a brief background of what was taking place at the time of this letter was written, and also what is happening in today's society. Secondly, how shall we relate to civil authority? What is our responsibilities? And what sort of citizenship does God want us to be? A brief background at the time of this writing was Paul was writing approximately in the latter part of 57 AD or the early part of 58 AD. Many of the Jews during Paul's time were advocating independence. They wanted to be free. And that's something we, the state code here, live free or die. We want to be free. Well, they wanted to be free. Many of the Jews during the time there also advocated independence. They wanted to get away from Rome, the government. They wanted the government because they were being so suppressed by the government. Folks, fasten your seatbelts. You're going to see a lot of things come up, and we're just going to have to go with it. They desired the yoke of Rome's bondage to be removed, and they were eager for political freedom. They went so far as they wanted their own king. Well, folks, we're about in the same situation. We just put in our own king, if you will. They also had civil disturbance occurring frequently. And on one occasion, Claudius demanded all the Jews to be removed, and according to Romans, removed from Rome, Acts 18:2. That was burning of the city. And so the Christians got blamed for it. And so he ordered all the people to be removed. If you look around and see what's happening to Christianity today in America, we're slowly losing. Why? Brother Bluen brought it very clearly this morning. It's because everybody wants their ears tickled. They don't want to hear the negative and the positive. They just want to hear everything love and glory. During that period of time, there was 2 insurrections. I can't even read my own writing here or my typing. First, in Luke 23:18 and 19, we see in Barnabas' time, Thaddeus and the resurrection in that time in Acts 5:36. And also, boy, the Jews sure didn't like the Roman government. They were upset, and they let them be known. The church is also going under some problems today. And so we need to take heed to that. But the greatest antidote to everything that's going around us is how we serve as Christians. How to respond to the government. The government in Jesus' day was often filled with deceit, corruption. Same thing today, isn't it? If you listen long enough, if you can sort out all the garbage and come out with it, we've got the same thing happening today. Folks, we see as we follow history and look at the Israelites from the very beginning all the way through, we see what happens to governments that do not follow God's will. While it is true, when we become Christians, we are resurrected from the darkness and transferred into God's home or His house. We become God's beloved children, according to Colossians 1 and 13. In effect, we have two citizenships. And you say, wait a minute. We have one in heaven, we have in earth. We're here. We're right now, I believe, I think I'm still on earth. Sometimes I wonder, but we're here. And so we have two citizenship. But we're going to see, according to the reading that we just had, that if we violate the earthly citizenship, we violate God's will. Now that, you say, wait a minute, there's a lot of things that happen around here. I don't like it. Well, you're right. I don't either. But we're told how to handle it. And that's the key, is looking at how do we handle adverse situations that happen in our lives. God is the one who ordained the principles of government. I want you to hang on to that there. The principles of government. In Daniel 2 and 21, it states that He removed kings and set up kings. In Daniel 4 and 17, the sentence is, by decree of the watchers and demands by the word of the holy ones, to the intent that living may know that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men. He still rules today. He's still in charge today. We still have commands that we have to follow. I know last time I spoke here, I spoke about the various commands and how to identify them and that there. And Rob brought out a command this morning. And in this section here that we're going to be covering, that we are covering, is commands. Folks, you don't have a choice whether you follow or not follow. You've got to follow. It's how we follow. Jesus said, "Thou wouldst have no power against me except it be given thee." In John 19 and 11. Everything we have, everything we are, is controlled, if we allow it, by God. He has all the power. He has all the knowledge. We just think we do. And that's where we get into trouble. Well, how should we follow or interact with civil authorities? The word authorities denotes the right to exercise power. Here we have addressed the human authorities. In Luke 12, verse 11, reads, "And when they were bringing you before the synagogues and the rulers and the authorities, be not anxious of how you shall answer or what ye shall say." Jesus is talking to his disciples then. He says, listen, you don't have to worry about it. You don't have to worry about what you're going to say. If you live in me and you will follow in me, I'm going to help you say it. I'm going to help you live it. He's going to help us through life if we listen to him and we apply what he tells us to do. Again, in John 19 and verse 11, Jesus said, he was talking to Pilate at the time, "Thou wouldst have no power against me except it were given unto thee." And so, it given unto him from above. In other words, God gave him the power. You're saying, wait a minute, I don't really care about, did God give all these people the power that they have today? Remember what I said? He'll give the principles of government. He tells us that we are all to be in subjection. There's a command. He says in Titus 3:1, he said, "Put them in mind to be in subjection to the rulers, to the authorities, to be obedient, and be ready to every good work." And I said, and so here we are. We're told what to do. Again, in 1 Peter 2:13 and 14, he said, "Be subject to every ordinance of man, for whose sake? The Lord's sake, whether king or as supreme, or to governments as by him set for vengeance on the evildoers." He's in charge. He's going to take the vengeance. Sometimes we want to. We look at what happened in D.C. and that there. There was nothing wrong with having a peaceful expression of what you believe in that there. In fact, that's what we're supposed to do. But when you start destroying things and belittling people, then you've gone beyond what God has allowed. Civil authorities are established by God in Romans 13:1. He said, "Let every soul be subject to higher powers. There is no power but of God, and the powers that are ordained of God." He's given us the power. The word establish means to place in order, to arrange, or to appoint. He does it. God instituted civil authorities for the good of mankind because we needed it. Can you imagine what it would be like if we had no authority at all? We're almost at that state now, but we call it authority. But just think about it. If you had, there was no rules of how to live or how to stand up. Everybody would be doing their own thing, and well, they're basically doing it in some ways right now. But what happens when you have no laws, no rules, no instructions? Everybody just runs around crazy. And so God instituted civil authorities for the good of mankind because we needed it. Without some type of government, it would be total anarchy. We're almost at that stage. Total anarchy. And that's my opinion, and maybe you're going to disagree with it, and it may be hard for you to digest what I'm saying today, is that, man, I sure don't like to follow all these rules. But there's a reason for them. We may not agree on the type of government which type of government is best or how much is needed, but we can agree upon the principles. We can agree upon those, that it must be, there has to be some type of order. From the very beginning of time, God set things in order. And as he went through, going from Genesis all the way through the scriptures and he has given us instructions and patterns to follow. He gives us instructions of how we're to handle our families, how we're to family relations one with another. Now he's given us how we're to handle the government. The government is not, God is not responsible for the Pacific rain, but it only exists because God allows it to exist. My question that I have today is, how long is he going to let us run in this pattern that we're running in right now? If I've mentioned earlier, and after you look back at the Israelites and look what happened to them, they went for a long time, and then all of a sudden, he says, that's it, folks. And he brought in another nation or another ruler. So we see that God established the principles of the government, but he did not set each in place and every government leader into power. He didn't put them in power. He didn't put our newly elected president in power. He didn't put the former one. We did. So who do we blame? God? No. God didn't do it. He set up the pattern and said, this is the way I want my governments to run. This is the way I want the church to run. This is the way I want my families to operate. The homes and that there. You think he approves of every home? You think he approves of every religious organization today? No. He says what? Follow my commandments. That's where he said it. He put a clause in there saying, listen, you're my people, but you must follow my commandments. You must do what I tell you to do, or pay the price. And I think about paying the price there, and I look back and think about my childhood. And I don't know about any of you, but I knew that when my mother told me to do something, and there was a price to pay, it wasn't like a lot of families today where they say, okay, if you do this, this is going to happen to you, but that's all right. We'll just give you a candy bar and go on your way in that there, or a cookie and that there. No. If I disobeyed, and she said there was going to be something coming up the pike, I knew that it was going to happen. God's the same way. He loves you so much that he gave his son for us. And he so loves everybody, and he came to seek and to save the lost, all mankind. But we have something to do, or pay the price. God instituted the home does not mean he approves of every home. He instituted the church, but God does not approve of every church. And we see evidence of that in Revelations 2 and 4, and also in Revelations 2 and 20, where they had disobeyed. They did not follow what God said. One was worshiping and teaching of worshiping Balaam, and the other one was upholding Jezebel. God said, listen, this is not right. God does not approve of everything that's right. Well, you say, well, wait a minute. Now, if we're to obey all these things, and you're saying you've got to submit yourself to it and that there, what is our responsibility? Well, first of all, the verse 1 of the reading that we had, he says, all are to be in subjection. All. Not exempting and saying one can't be in subjection, another one. He says all are to be in subjections. Many try to distinguish between good and bad laws and governments, and how often become exasperated with government rules and regulations. Now, I don't know about you, but have you ever been exasperated by some of the laws and that there has been passed? Yeah, I know. I don't know about you, but I know I have. Quite a few, especially here lately, but that has happened. But it's not our job. Whether it's good or bad, that's not our job to say whether it's good or bad. We don't have a choice to say, well, this one here, we're going to follow this law, but we're not going to follow that law. That's what we're doing with religion, isn't it? Well, this society today says, well, I don't think we'll have the Lord's Supper, but maybe once a year, once a month. What did God say? On the first day of the week. He didn't say you could change it. The only exception that we have for not following man's law or civil law and that there is if it violates God's law. That's the only time. Every other law is supposed to be enforced by God or by civil authorities with justice. We ask, what is justice? Well, that's a good question. I don't have an answer for it anymore. I used to be able to tell you exactly what it was, but right now I don't know how people define what justice is. But I know that the justice that I see is the justice of God that's going to come about in the end. We either obey Him or we pay the price. So we don't have the choice whether we follow good laws or bad laws or what they are. The only exception, as I mentioned, is if it violates His law. One that I think of really recently that has bothered me a little bit is meeting on the first day of the week. In some places in the United States in the last few months, they've tried to close down the church building totally. Saying you can't meet. Right now, we would be, at one period of time, we'd be held probably be not legal. But to me, the Lord says meet on the first day of the week. That means I've got to meet. Unfortunately, I've got a feeling that because of this virus that has come up, we have brethren who are going to say, well, I can stay at home and I can watch TV and watch the program over TV, and I don't have to go to the church building anymore. It's nice and warm here, and I can have a cup of coffee and that there, and nobody's going to see what I'm doing. God sees what you're doing. But I got a question to ask anyone. How can you exhort or admonish anybody if you're not present? How can you do it? How can I say I'm meeting on the first day of the week and obeying all of God's commands when I am not exhorting and admonishing one another, helping one another? I have a problem with that. I know that I may be forced in a situation that I don't care for, but I may have to close the doors in the Northern Valley Church of Christ because of lack of attendance, the lack of growth over the last 20 years or so. That bothers me. Because I went up there in 79 and helped start the church up there. Folks, if we are going to follow God's laws, and we're going to do as He tells us to do, we're going to implement all of His commands to the best of our ability. And this is one command that we're told to do that we need to give a lot of consideration to. It's sort of like following the law that they have on the speed limit. Now, I know that none of you that drive always obeys all the laws. Well, I find myself sometimes looking over my shoulder and say, well, where's Johnny Laws sitting at? Where's he at? When we violate God's law, we better be more than looking over our shoulders. We better get on our knees and realize the price to be paid. So, God has given the sword, as we see in the reading, and the sword represents the power and authority. He has given civil authority the power and authority to punish those who break the laws. You know, I think about it, he says, without laws, enforcement would be just good advice. If you didn't have laws with a penalty to it, it would be just good advice. We've got good advice right now. We've got good advice right here in New Hampshire where you are required to wear a mask, but there's no penalty. Well, let's say at the last I heard there was no penalty. It's just everybody's opinion. Brother, when we get into opinions, we're in trouble. Because that's what split the church so many times is our opinions. Not God's law, but what we think. That's a sermon in itself. So to bear the sword was given the punishment, let the authorities know that God has given them the authority to do so. And so we need to follow the laws. What must do to be a good citizen? And I've went well over my time, unfortunately. But He's given us and told us how to do things. He told us to pay our taxes. Now, how many of you on the 15th of April like to pay taxes? I don't see any of you raising your hands and saying, yeah, I do. But you know what happens when you don't pay your taxes? You're hurting everyone around you. Because those taxes, even though we don't like paying them, they do pay for things that we can't do ourselves individually. That's what taxes are for. That's what they're supposed to be for. The fact that the government is not doing it and using it correctly, that's out of our hands. Once we pay our taxes, it's up to them. They're the ones that are going to have to justify to the Lord why they misused it. Do you think that Jesus enjoyed paying taxes, knowing what was taking place and the suffering and persecution that was taking place in His time? What He said, give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and unto the Lord what is His. I don't like to pay taxes. I'm quite sure none of you do either. But it's our responsibility. And it does not violate God's law. In fact, it is according in keeping with his law. And so when we fail to do what we are, we're actually destroying not only our government, but our neighbors, because there's so many things that we can't afford to pay individually that is covered by our taxes. So today, many do not respect the President of the United States. Folks, we don't have to necessarily agree with what they're doing, but we should respect the office. We respect the office, not necessarily the person. I've served under many commanding officers and that there, and when I was in the military, I didn't necessarily agree with their moral beings, but I had to respect the office. I had to respect the person. I had to give honor to those who honor was deserved, what was due to them. I can respect a person, but there's a fine line between honor and respect. So I say all this here to bring you up to there that the government authority was instituted by God. The principles of government is instituted by God, just as he instituted it for the family, for the house, and that there. We're commanded to submit to government authorities. It's not something we have a choice to, as long as that does not violate God's law. And the only way you're going to know what violates God's law is to study and to study and to study. There's nothing I enjoy more than sitting and studying God's law and reading his works. And surprisingly enough, even at my age, I find that every time I read it, I learn something new. It wasn't that it wasn't there, but I wasn't prepared to receive it, and so God didn't overload my circuit. We must pay to our taxes whether we like it or not. Our basic responsibility to the government is to pray, to pay, and to obey. We are told to pray for our enemy. You ever stop to think about when you're praying and that there? You don't have to pray that they continue doing what they're doing. You pray that their hearts will be changed, that they'll change their attitudes. So, with this in mind, I'm going to ask Brother Dave Rowe, if he vacated on me. That's all right. He's coming now. I'm going to ask Dave if he'll read again the text that we just went through. And I want you to realize, the reason I asked this to happen is we need to understand we are commanded to submit. It's not a choice. And if we don't submit to our government and follow as he has commanded us to do, we're going to pay the price, because he is a minister. The government is a minister of God. And I didn't go through that in the lesson here. I ad-libbed too much. But Dave, would you mind coming and reading?
Once again, Romans 13, 1 through 7. Every person is to be in subjection to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those which exist are established by God. Therefore, whoever resists authority has opposed the ordinances of God, and they who have opposed will receive condemnation upon themselves. For rulers are not a cause of fear for good behavior, but for evil. Do you want to have no fear of authority? Do what is good, and you will have praise from the same. For it is a minister of God to you for good. But if you do what is evil, be afraid. For it does not bear the sword for nothing. For it is a minister of God, an avenger who brings wrath on the one who practices evil. Therefore it is necessary to be in subjection, not only because of wrath, but also for conscience sake. For because of this you also pay taxes. For rulers are servants of God, devoting themselves to this very thing. Render to all what is due to them, tax to whom tax is due, custom to whom custom, fear to whom fear, honor to whom honor. Do you have an invitation? Okay. If you have a need, we are now at the time of our invitation. So I encourage you, if you have a need, please let me know as Patrick leads us in this invitation song.